Hi, my name is Adrian Ludwig. I'm on the Android security team here at Google. And just this week, we released our 2016 year in review. And so I know that it's a long document and a lot of folks won't have the opportunity to go through the entire thing. So we wanted to put together a few of the highlights, talk through them, and give you a little bit of perspective on what we've seen over the last year in Android security. So to begin with, what's incredible is the continued growth in the Android ecosystem. And along with the growth in the Android ecosystem, our protections have grown as well. In 2016, we grew to protect over 1.4 billion devices out in the ecosystem across the entire globe. We scan over 750 million devices per day, so an incredibly large investment in checking what's going on in the ecosystem and understanding both the protections that we have in place, but also the risks that users are being exposed to. One of the most important characteristics of the Android ecosystem is how we've committed to being open. And from a security standpoint, that's incredibly valuable. It gives us the ability to tap into the collective intelligence around the world that's invested in protecting the Android ecosystem, users, devices, and applications. So you don't have to rely just on Google, just on OEMs, or just on carriers. You can rely really on the entire world and its commitment to protecting itself. And that's something that's unique about the way we've designed our ecosystem, is the ability to bring in that collective intelligence. To facilitate that intelligence and make sure that the best things are being done, it's really important that there be data, that there be transparency into what's happening in the ecosystem, the direction, and the types of threats that users are being exposed to. So this year in review report is just one example of the type of transparency that we're trying to provide and make sure is pervasive across the entire ecosystem. Openness also means choice. It means that you can look at the data, understand what's going on in the ecosystem, and make decisions about how you interact with your device, about what type of device you select, about where you install applications from. So all of this is designed to make it possible for users to do the right thing for themselves as they're interacting with the rest of the world through the Android ecosystem. And the reflection of that is the incredible types of experiences that were being built. And these are experiences that depend at their core on the security of their devices. Things as simple as games, where the integrity of the operating system is critical to the functioning of gameplay. Things like ride sharing or other sort of social mechanisms for consummating transactions, Uber, Lyft, and all of the other types of applications that have been built on top of the Android platform and other mobile platforms depend upon the security of those environments. Some of the most exciting examples of how we're seeing Android and mobile devices transform how people interact with the world are at the high end, right? Where payments are becoming easier and easier on mobile devices because of the integrity and security of these operating systems. And even at the very extreme high end, you see users who are potentially some of the most significant targets in the world, right? State leaders, national leaders, international leaders who are able to use the openness and flexibility of Android to build very secure capabilities that haven't been possible on closed systems in the past. For me personally, one of the things that's most exciting is that Android has facilitated low-end devices being more secure. So for users who aren't able to commit hundreds of dollars or even thousands of dollars to protect themselves, they still get out-of-the-box protection. And that's one of the things that I'm personally very committed to, and the team around me and Google are very committed to as well, making sure that everybody in the world, our billions of users, have access to the best security protections that are available so they can go about their lives in knowing and having confidence in their mobile device. So that's sort of how we approach it from a strategic standpoint. When we look at a single year, we begin to see what the trend lines look like. And so I wanted to hit a few of the highlights that are included in the annual report. It's about 75 pages long, so you may not have an opportunity to read the entire thing. But here are some of the takeaways that you can probably hang on to and think about over the coming year. The first is the expansion of the protections that we have that are service-based in the ecosystem. So actively checking and improving the consumer, developer, enterprise protections to make sure that users have the best environment possible. So a big investment in those kinds of capabilities. We've also invested quite a bit in the platform security. When I talk about the platform, I mean the open source technology that's delivered on all Android devices. So we've enhanced it with key security technologies, greater adoption of encryption, greater adoption of smart lock. We'll talk through some of the trends that we've seen over the last year as we go through more of the content. One of the most significant changes in 2016 was that we transitioned towards having a monthly security update, including security fixes that have been found by the security community outside of the Google, as well as our researchers here in Google. We had 12 security updates on a monthly basis, and we're going to continue that going into 2017. Very significant adoption of those by OEMs across the entire Android ecosystem. One of the hallmarks of our year in review is a focus on data and looking at what's actually happening in the ecosystem. And so there are a few measurements that we're going to call out, and I'll sort of walk through them as we go through this presentation, but they go really into great detail in the written out form of the annual report. Some of those data are around malware and the distribution of malware. 2016, relatively flat. Very slight declines in the overall number of devices that have malware installed from what we saw in 2015. On a category by category basis, whether devices were in play or outside of play, we saw those declines. One of the highlights for me was that 50 out of the top 50 most populous countries in terms of number of devices that they have that are downloading applications saw a decline in the rates of malware getting onto those devices. So incredible progress that we've made in protecting Android users across the Android ecosystem. And then, since there was a lot of news about Android security, as has been the case for the last several years, we'll flag a couple of the most prominent stories and talk through where those stories went after they hit their peak in the headlines and then how they declined throughout the year as protections have kicked into place and made sure that users ended up in a safe place. So we're going to walk through three different primary areas: the robust platform, services, and updates, and talk through the changes that happened in 2016. So here we go. Let's take a look at the platform. At this point, Android has delivered on most of the major security capabilities that are expected of any mobile platform. We have strong integrity through verified boot going up through the entire stack. It's tied to a hardware root of trust. Encryption has been enabled for 2 major releases, and so we've begun to see substantial adoption of encryption across the Android ecosystem. So there were a number of significant features that were delivered in 2016, but one of the most important characteristics of these features was not the technology itself, but the rate at which it was being picked up. And the rate at which we're able to deliver new security technology into the platform. So this is a graph that's included in the report. It talks about the fact that even though encryption of full disk encryption was enabled all the way almost 4 or 5 years ago in the Android platform, prior to Android 5.1, there was practically no adoption of it. It was there, users just didn't turn it on. And so we saw adoption that was less than 1%. It became required for new devices with Android 6.0. And with Android 7.0, we saw continued acceleration. So we went from 1% to 20 to 80%. And we're expecting that that will continue to grow until we achieve, over the next couple of years, nearly 100% adoption of encryption across the Android ecosystem. So that, I think, is one of the most important stories of 2016 in terms of features, is recognizing that these features are able to achieve velocity and adoption very, very quickly, which is really exciting. Here's another feature. This one, there were changes in how users interact with the feature, but not as substantial as one encryption. So we saw adoption of smart lock go up by over 175%. So the story here is really understanding that the features that are being released are being picked up and being used very, very quickly. And so when we look at the core platform capabilities, the fact that all of the major features are in place, and we're now starting to enter a phase of incrementalism in terms of the features that are being introduced into Android, I think we're actually in a really exciting place for getting these features out to as many users as possible. It also makes it possible for us to focus on the details. Really invest in individual security researchers, expanding the number of people who are finding issues and reporting on them. So one of the areas that we've been investing a lot in 2016 is in our security rewards program. The way this program works is anybody in the world can become a security researcher focused on Android. All they have to do is find issues and report them to us. One of the really fascinating characteristics that we've seen of the security rewards program is who it is that it draws in. Areas of the world that previously have not been significantly involved in providing independent security research have really flourished on Android. So areas of China, Eastern Europe, and a number of other places around the world that previously hadn't had a significant amount of public open security research have really been contributing a lot to Android, to the tune of over 100 different contributors around the world and over $1 million invested in finding and fixing security issues on the Android platform. So that's where we've been investing in the platform itself. The other area that we've been investing is in comprehensive services. These are the services that we use to help monitor the ecosystem and react in near real time to issues that might be found. So let's talk through some of those capabilities. As you may recall from last year's year in review, or if you've been looking closely at what we're doing in Android security, there's 4 different areas that we're investing in services. The first is around analyzing applications. I'll talk more about that in just a second. We call that Verify Apps. The second is what we refer to as the sensor network, or sometimes we talk about it as safety net. This is looking at non-application-based signals on a device to try to find potential security risks. So we're analyzing whether devices might be being exploited in the browser, whether they might be running into network problems, or any other type of issue that has security significance. The third thing that we invest in is protections for lost or stolen devices. It continues to be the case that the largest threat that most users face is a potential loss of the device, where not only is their data exposed to risk, but they also are potentially losing the significant financial investment that they've made in what may be one of their most important and valued possessions. And so Android Device Manager is designed to help users lock or find a stolen or lost device. The fourth area that's a pillar for our security services is APIs. Recognizing that Google has built these services, made them available to consumers, but that there are application developers that might want to take advantage of them as well. And so APIs is an area that we've invested in significantly, and the report goes into a number of different examples of the types of APIs. I'll talk about just one today. The application review process continues to be one of the most high-profile and significant services that we have available within Google Services for Android. It plays 2 different functions. The first function is to make sure that any application that gets uploaded to Google Play has gone through a comprehensive security review. That means dynamic analysis, looking at signatures, third-party reports, having an integrated approach to handling security reports from other security solution providers, antivirus companies, etc. It also means that we pull in data from the safety net sensor network to see what's actually happening out on the ecosystem so that we can actually incorporate that into assessing whether an application is safe to be on Google Play. So that's one function that we play. The other is to provide a protection for applications being installed outside of Google Play. And they go through exactly the same level of scrutiny. So very, very detailed scrutiny that in many cases can be fully automated, but in some cases ends up going to a final manual human review. So we can categorize applications into one of about 20 different categories of potentially harmful application, or say that it's safe and the user can go on and install and go about their business. We constantly re-review these applications to see if there's anything that's changed, if there's new data that's available, or even if maybe we made a mistake in the past. Because these things happen when you're operating at the type of scale that we're operating at, with over 6 billion applications reviewed every single day. So we've got a little video that sort of takes you through the process to understand how it is that we approach it, and we'll play it here and take a look at it.
Did you know Android has built-in antivirus protection that gets more powerful every second? It starts when an Android developer uploads their app to Google Play. A self-learning app risk analyzer scans and simulates apps looking for potential security issues. If there's an issue, the app won't appear in Google Play. On Android devices, Verify Apps regularly scans for harmful behavior, warning users, and then sending this information to the analyzer so it keeps getting smarter. SafetyNet also scans devices for exploits and network vulnerabilities, protecting more than 1 billion devices daily, and again sending data back for the analyzer to get more powerful. Android and Google Play, constantly making your mobile device safer at home, work, and everywhere in between.
One of the areas that we've significantly increased our investment in 2016 was in what's called machine learning, neural networks, and providing artificial intelligence as a means to detect harmful behavior. One of the most interesting characteristics that we've found as we've begun to develop these new technologies is that often discovery is not about looking for the needle in the haystack. It's about trying to find the effect of that needle or trying to see what impact it has. So one of the approaches that's sort of represented here visually is where we cluster applications together. So we're not necessarily looking for the specific bad behavior within these clusters, but we identify applications that are related based on some characteristics, right? All applications that abuse SMS, all applications that take advantage of the user's credentials, what's called phishing. These clusters get created, and then in an automated fashion, we can detect applications that look similar to the other members of a cluster, but that haven't been categorized. And that accelerates our ability to identify potential related applications that wouldn't be visible to a human, right? There are just too many variables that are in there. So we're looking at literally hundreds of thousands of different characteristics of any one application, and then trying to see how it might be related to millions of other applications that are out there in the ecosystem. The human brain just can't process that sort of scale. And so we're using machine learning and neural networks to build out these kinds of capabilities. Another investment we've made that's at incredible scale is a technology called safe browsing. Originally developed at Google almost 10 years ago, this is a protection that's been built into most of the world's major browsers at this point, on most of the world's major platforms, so Windows, iOS, and on Android. And what it does is it warns users about potential risks on a specific website or HTML-based page that they might be going to. On Android, we've gone one step further. Not only is it exposed as a capability inside the browser, but it's also an API. So any application can incorporate this technology directly and protect users in the context of their application when it might be displaying web content. We've seen, of course, that there is some bad behavior out there on the web. And so there are many instances where we're flagging things across the ecosystem and helping to protect users that way. Another area that we've been investing in, as I mentioned, is identifying bad applications and then protecting users from that. This graph that I'm showing here right now, that's described in more detail in the full annual report, is simultaneously one of the most boring and one of the most exciting graphs. And I think it's its boringness that is what's telling. For many years, there's been a concern that at any moment, there could be an uptick in the level of potentially harmful applications that are installed on Android devices. So this graph goes back almost 3 years at this point, showing quarter by quarter how many devices in the Android ecosystem had a potentially harmful application installed. And what's interesting about it is how flat it is. It's how boring it is. And that speaks to the efforts that we've had in place to protect users on an ongoing basis. Every time we see an uptick in the line, new protections are introduced. Every time we see a downtick, new protections are introduced. And so we're able to keep it nice and stable, even though there's very active efforts to exploit or take advantage of Android users, as is to be naturally expected on an ecosystem of this scale with the diversity of use cases that Android is facing. And so I'm really excited that this has continued to stay stable, with about 0.7% of Android devices having a potentially harmful application installed on them in 2016. We look both at the number of devices that have a potentially harmful application installed, but we also look at the mechanism by which these installations take place. And so the second graph here that's described in more detail in the report provides an overview of different channels that users might install from. If they're installing from outside of Google Play, we did see a decrease in the amount of risk that a user is exposed to. About 9% of installations from outside of Google Play were potentially harmful applications in 2015. In 2016, we've cut that nearly in half to about 4.8%. In the context of Google Play, which is the lower line here, we've also cut it by about 50%, but the baseline was a lot lower, which gives us the ability to make a statement that the risks of installing from Google Play are about 1/10 the risk that a user is exposed to if they're installing from outside of Google Play. We're going to continue investing in both of these areas to make sure that we have the best possible protections in Google Play and the best possible protections for users who are installing outside of Google Play. That's the commitment that we've made to the ecosystem to maintain openness, but also allow for users to be safe in the face of that kind of openness. There's a lot more detail there on the right-hand side and in the full report. I'd encourage you to go take a look if you want to get into it. There are a number of other slices of the data that are included in the annual review. One of them is country by country. Not going to dive into the detail here, but as I mentioned sort of at the beginning of the presentation, of the 50 largest, most populous user bases for Android, those countries, every one of them had a decline outside of Google Play in 2016 in the overall risk that users were exposed to in installing applications. So very proud of the fact that we're seeing the ecosystem get better at protecting itself on a country by country basis. We also have inside the annual report a breakdown on type of applications. So enterprises, for example, may not be as concerned about SMS fraudware, or maybe they're very concerned about Trojans or backdoors or phishing of user credentials. And so we break it down category by category. Most of the major categories did see a decline both inside of Google Play and on this next graph, outside of Google Play as well. So you can take a look at the report and get into the full details of where and what types of risks users are being exposed to and understand what it looks like. But to summarize it, basically in 2016, everything got a little bit better, which is exciting for a security practitioner to know that the efforts that we're investing are actually working. And we're seeing users get to a place that's safer than it was in 2015, 14, and sort of goes on backwards in time. One of the key learnings that we've had over the last several years is that just protecting from malware is not sufficient. That there are use cases at an application level, but also at a personal level, where users want to know more about the environment that their applications are running and how safe their environment is. One of the things that was introduced in 2015 is what we call the Safety Net Attestation API. This is an API that's exposed to application developers, whether that be an enterprise inside of their MDM agent, or maybe a banking application in their direct-to-consumer application, or one of the largest areas of adoption we've seen is actually in the gaming space, where games, which are in some cases multi-billion-dollar businesses on an annual run rate, and have all of their revenue coming from these client devices that are running Android, iOS, and other mobile operating systems, they really depend upon the integrity of these devices. And so some of them take advantage of these APIs. So because there are over 200 million instances of the Safety Net Attestation API being invoked on a daily basis around the world, we're able to get a good view of the integrity of devices around the world. And so we go into the annual report and break that down sort of country by country. Here's a visualization, and you can see some highlights, right? In Japan, over 97% of devices have an intact security model. That has gone through the Google certification process. So very high degree of confidence there. It's lesser in some of the other areas of the world. India is an area of the world, for example, where the number of devices that have gone through certification is significantly lower, at about 86%. And that's an area that we're going to be making investments in 2017 and into the future to make sure that we're able to raise both the quality and the compatibility of these devices around the world. So that gives you a sense for the services and the protections that we've put in place and how those are playing out in the ecosystem. The last area that I wanted to spend some time talking about is specifically around updates. This has been a very substantial area of investment for Google over 2016, as well as for a lot of our partners in the Android ecosystem. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've been doing in terms of updating both devices at the operating system level, but also in terms of updating applications and making it possible for developers to be responsive to potential security risks in their applications. So to start, let's talk about devices. It's been a really exciting year. 2015, we introduced what was called the security patch level, which made it possible to track how many devices were being updated with security updates. In the past, it simply wasn't possible. The diversity of devices in the ecosystem, the diversity of versions, made it very challenging to do that. And there were actually security research that was done by the University of Cambridge and a few other places just to understand how many devices were being updated. So simply being able to understand was significant progress in 2016. Beyond that, once we could see that over half of the top 50 devices at the end of 2016 had an available security patch. And in fact, over half of the devices in the Android ecosystem, over 700 million devices, received a security update at some point in 2016. So significant investment across all of the different OEMs. Here, we've also highlighted a few of the devices that are receiving updates very, very quickly and are maintaining on an ongoing basis a high level of patching. Devices coming from Google, like the Pixel and the Pixel XL, the Moto Z from Motorola, Oppo, the A33W, the Nexus 6P, Nexus 5, 5X and 6, Samsung with the Galaxy S7. So a wide range of different devices that are receiving security updates on a regular basis. So really exciting to see in 2016 the ability to actually understand what's happening and great progress in terms of getting devices brought up to date. One of the reasons that those security updates are so important is because of the active investment that we're making in security research. Earlier, I talked about over 100 different security researchers worldwide and over $1 million spent on finding security issues and then resolving those security issues across the ecosystem. The result of that labor was over 600 different security issues that were identified and that were solved through security bulletins that were delivered on a monthly basis. So an incredible amount of investment, diverse set of perspectives and opinions that are being brought in that ultimately make the Android ecosystem that much more strong. So really excited to see that level of investment being made and the results that we're getting from security research program and the security patches being pushed out to Android devices. We want to make sure that that same level of scrutiny that's applied at the operating system level can be applied at the application level as well. My history and the history of a lot of folks in the security community has been to watch investments made at the platform level never really make it to the applications, and then the applications become the weakest link. And so with Android, we're trying to make sure that that doesn't happen by making early investments in detecting and preventing security vulnerabilities at the application level. One of the programs that we've put in place is what's called the Google Play Application Security Improvements Program. This was launched in 2015. It takes advantage of our scanning technology to look at applications that are published to Google Play and find potential security issues. Not bad behavior by the application, but just a mistake, including an old version of a library that's no longer up to date. Mishandling a particular type of certificate when managing encryption on an HTTPS connection. So in 2016, we expanded the scope of that program, adding over 18 new checks for potential security issues and helping developers know about the flaws that were introduced into their applications and correct them. In 2017, we're going to continue to do that. We think this is a really important sort of foundational technology that's unique to Android, but shows how we're very committed to openness and to helping developers flourish on the platform. So that openness is a double-edged sword. One of the things that comes of being open and transparent and encouraging security research on the platform is news. And sometimes that news can be a little bit biting. And so one of the things that we want to do is take a look back at some of the larger stories in 2016, talk about what's happened, and make sure that people recognize how much protections have been put in place in direct response to some of these issues. So the first example of a potentially harmful application that received significant attention in 2016 was named Turkish Clicker by Checkpoint in research that they published this year. This was actually a family that Google had been tracking through both Google Play and outside of Google Play since 2014. So it's one that we've been monitoring for quite a while. What was interesting about it is that it diversified significantly around the world and had a large number of different applications that had been built. So it was very actively trying to evade detection both by Google and by others in the security research community. By the end of 2016, the protections that we had built, as well as some of the ones that were made available by other third parties, had done a great job. And basically, by the end of 2016, we'd seen Turkish Clicker come to an almost complete decline. Ghost Push was the name of a family that received significant attention in the middle of 2015, and actually was quite prominent in our 2015 year in review as well. At one point in 2015, it represented almost half of the overall installs that were taking place in the ecosystem. It was so aggressive. And across the entire year, Ghost Push was about a third of the overall potentially harmful applications that were installed in the Android ecosystem in 2015. This graph and the discussion that's inside the year in review talks about the protections that were put in place and the fact that by the end of 2016, we basically aren't seeing Ghost Push at all anymore. Their efforts to install applications have been thwarted through a combination of direct intervention by Google as well as intervention in partnership with our OEM partners and some of the others in the Android ecosystem in order to protect the installation of these applications onto devices. Another example that received fairly large attention was a family called Hummingbird. These applications rooted the device and then tried to take advantage of third-party properties on the web. And that's a common theme that you might have seen across the last three families, where they're really trying to monetize the devices through abuse, such as installing applications or going after properties on the web. What we didn't see a lot of in 2016 were applications that tried to actually access user data. Usually, if there was any access of user data, it was to get at credentials to facilitate installation of applications or another sort of commercial mechanism. But the short of it is, for Hummingbird, identified over 24,000 unique applications, a large number of install attempts around the world, but almost all of them were outside of Google Play. And so here was an area where the protections in Google Play were sufficient to prevent all but one instance of the application in the Hummingbird family getting onto Google Play. And so most of the activity was outside of Google Play. The cleanup was successful, and at this point we're seeing very few installations of Hummingbird onto user devices. And so to summarize, when we're looking at potentially harmful applications, what we've seen consistently is early detection by Google Play or by the Google efforts to identify potentially harmful applications. Researchers in the security community flagging or identifying these things and generating headlines and media interest in them a little bit later in 2016. But that ultimately, soon after that, we see those families begin to recede in terms of their effectiveness and the impact that they have on users. So the last thing that we wanted to mention was, I've hinted at it a few times, the goal here was to summarize some of the highlights from our annual report. There's a link, should be somewhere behind me, I think, to describe where you can go to grab the annual year in review. I would encourage you to read it. It gets into a lot more detail on individual families, on individual protections that have been introduced, and gives you a good sense for where it is that we see Android security going in 2016 and a precursor to where it'll be going into the future. So thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time, and have a good rest of your day.